Okay, so what I've got right here is just a setup for one of the ways I might typically start an oil painting. I've got canvas here that's pre-primed or pre-gessoed, just typical, bought from the store, ready to go. I've got some Gamblin paint here that's a burnt umber, and I'm using solvent. And I've got a reference image over to my right that's on my iPad. Some people might feel more comfortable if they have something that's printed out. My printer died recently during a move, and since I'm trying to work on reducing my paper footprint, I decided let's see how long I can go without replacing that printer, because I ended up with tons of materials I felt like I didn't need anyway. So I feel like this will stop me from printing quite as many things. What I'm doing to start out with is I'm looking for basically the location of the heads. I've got three subjects, three people here in the painting, and I'm looking for just basic shapes. The legs themselves become almost sort of a rectangular trapezoid. What's that shape? It's not quite a rectangle. Kind of angles in. So I'm sure somebody out there knows the answer to that. I could go look it up after this. So what I'm doing with the paint is I'm keeping it really, really thin. And what I'm going to do is work with this the same way that often I teach people to draw, which is sort of more subtractive. Okay. So I'm going to use these paints to kind of build up on themselves. Okay, so now that I've positioned kind of where I want the heads to be, so what I'm looking at is actually the relationship of the gaze in this case. So here I have a young girl who's looking up to this figure, and so the eye direction is traveling like this. You can draw that in if it helps you. Here, same thing, I have a small baby. His head is positioned slightly below that of the other figure. So the reason I'm looking at these relationships is because this is what's going to tell the story for the painting. These are the things that I want to be really intentionally positioned within the space, right? Okay, so then the other thing I'm doing is, again, starting to consider, okay, well, now that I've kind of positioned those items, what's happening with light and shadow within this space? And so that's when I'm going to start using some blocking in to just block in those areas of value. Okay, so I've got this landscape stuff happening in the background. It's darker. And I've really got the iPad kind of closer than I would normally be doing. And that's partly so you can see that I have it close enough to my material. I'm going to scoot it out of the way just a tiny bit because I don't really want to get oil paint and solvent on that surface. Okay, and now I'm blocking in some tree forms that are happening behind the figure. Okay, and then again, using a fair amount of solvent for this, keeping the paint almost watery. So what this is helping me do is establish a value pattern that I want for the painting, and to do it fairly quickly. And it's also going to help me establish, to see, are there any adjustments or changes I want to make. I can already tell I might want to shift the head just a tiny bit, maybe to the right, but really I'm pretty happy with that. I've got like a nice light opening or space back behind the heads and the figures. Okay, so again, I'm still blocking in areas of value. I'm looking to see, okay, where are my major lights and darks within this space? And one of the reasons for working like this is because what happens is people dive into detail really early on in painting, and then they discover that they don't like where the figures are. And by then it's too late, because you put so much effort into carefully painting a hand or trying to get a leg right, or something like that. And then you realize, well, wait a minute, overall my composition kind of falls flat. Well, this is how you stop that from happening. Okay? Okay, so again, I have quickly blocked in some areas of light and shadow. Now I can start to, and I'm actually drawing through where the legs will be. I'm drawing the base or the stone form that the figure's going to be seated on. And it's okay to draw through stuff. Helps you visualize where something exists in space. Helps you make that more accurate. Even thinking about where it goes through behind the figure. We talk a lot about, well, what's the purpose in using perspective for artists. Well, those things give us visual cues to help understand where things exist in space. I know that this we're seeing sort of almost straight on, so I've created these angles in like that to suggest that the space recedes back to a vanishing point. Okay, and as I work, I can continue to build up these values, continue to get a little bit more specific. Let's see, I'm getting darker here for that stone bench. Okay, I'm actually pretty happy with some of what's happening. I haven't, okay, I should actually block in some of the value that's coming from that bench. And the image I'm working from is a mock-up that's meant to help me visualize what the final painting will be. All the elements of the reference image are not exactly the way I want them to be for the final painting. And that's not so unusual, because what you have to keep in mind is that you want to work from life and from real sources and references as much as possible. But sometimes the things we want to convey do require a little bit of imagination. But the challenge is setting up some real life information that can help you make those imagined elements more realistic. Because you don't want the viewer looking at it and saying, well, something's wrong with this. This doesn't make sense. This looks totally weird. And so again, what I did was the client wants a painting of her children with Jesus. Obviously, Jesus not likely to come and sit for me to get ready to make this painting, but their dad was a great stand-in. And so that enabled me to get a reference image. And so even though his face won't be exactly the same, using his figure to help identify where some of these elements are going to be in space. Okay. All right, and so those are the beginning stages of sketching in with oil paint.